The Second World War is filled with stories of heroes, sacrifice, and unimaginable pain and suffering. Among these heroes, there is a group of women who risked everything for their families and their countries, and even to this day, their stories stand out as an example of bravery. We are talking about women in the role of spies. These women played a crucial role in the war effort, gathering intelligence that would shape key military operations and ultimately help the Allies win the war. And while their contributions were invaluable, the risks they took were enormous. Female spies that got captured faced a fate that was worse than death. They were handed over to the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police that was infamous for their brutal methods of interrogation. In their dark chambers designed to break your will, these women would endure endless physical and psychological suffering that goes beyond our wildest comprehension. Welcome to Past Perspectives, and today we dive into the horrifying things Nazis did to female spies when captured. Together we will explore the unimaginable hardships they faced, and we look at some stories of women that were willing to give everything for their countries, even their lives. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you get to know about all the history topics that were never even talked about in history class. The Second World War was a cataclysmic event that spanned across the entire globe. Over 100 countries got involved in the war, and as a result, over 85 million people lost their lives and entire cities were completely destroyed. Central to this conflict was the rise of Nazi Germany under the lead of Adolf Hitler. His aggressive expansionist policies and ideological beliefs of racial purity set the stage of a war of unprecedented scale and horror that would last for 6 years. On September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and shortly after, multiple countries across Europe followed, initiating a period of terror that included forced labor, execution, and the implementation of the final solution. Over the next few years, the war was fought on multiple fronts, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen tundra of the Eastern Front, and from the skies of Britain to the islands of the Pacific. The complexity of the war was staggering. It not only involved traditional military engagements, but also economic warfare, psychological operations, and political alliances. Over the course of the war, the scale got so immense that it required the mobilization of entire societies, with men and women contributing to the war effort, both on the front lines and on the home front. At this time, everybody knew that the stakes were incredibly high, and the outcome of the war would affect the world for the next decades and even centuries to come. Therefore, the art of espionage became more important than ever. Spies at that time served as the invisible helpers of military strategies, influenced political decisions, and ultimately provided essential insights into the enemy's plans for their own country. However, gathering this intelligence was a risky game where the smallest piece of information could mean the difference between victory or defeat. On the other side, every tiny mistake behind enemy lines could get you imprisoned immediately, and an even more horrifying fate would await you. In the game of gathering information behind enemy lines, female spies have been picked preferably despite the traditional gender roles and societal norms that were predominant at that time. But why were women often chosen for these dangerous missions? The first and most obvious reason was that women were less likely to arouse suspicion. See, during that time, women were often underestimated, and in a male-dominated world, nobody saw a woman as someone that would contribute to the war, especially in the beginning stages of it. Their perceived innocence allowed them to move more freely and gather intelligence without attracting any unnecessary attention. Additionally, women had unique access to social circles and settings that men couldn't get in without raising eyebrows. For example, women could more easily infiltrate social gatherings, hospitals, and even factories where they could gather valuable information or engage in sabotage. With hidden roles such as nurses, secretaries, or caregivers, they had the opportunity to take part in crucial conversations or gain access to important documents. Moreover, women were often more skilled in building trust and forming relationships due to their emotional intelligence. Their ability to read social situations made them effective in information subtly, often without raising alarms. The last and most important reason for the Allies was that they were able to exploit gender biases of the enemy. The Axis powers and Nazi Germany in particular had deeply ingrained prejudices against women, viewing them as less capable and therefore less likely to be spies. For the Nazis, this underestimation often proved to be a fatal mistake, as it allowed female spies to operate right under their noses and gather information that would ultimately contribute to the downfall of the Nazi regime. But how did women even end up as spies, as it was not a traditional job role you could simply pick? During that time, women were typically recruited through military networks, resistance movements, and even through personal connections. Some were approached directly by intelligence agencies, while others volunteered, but often they had the same reason to do it. They were driven by a sense of duty, or the desire to revenge loved ones they had lost in the conflict. Once someone was picked, they went through strict background checks, making sure they were not a double agent and ensuring that they had the necessary skills, temperament, and most importantly, the unwavering loyalty required for such high-risk missions. Their training was extremely rigorous, and it was designed to prepare them for the challenges they would face behind enemy lines. One of the best documented training camps was the one run by Britain's Special Operations Executive. They trained their spies in a range of skills, including physical fitness, hand-to-hand combat, and survival techniques, as well as specialized training in areas like cryptography, wireless operation, and sabotage. They were also taught how to use a variety of weapons and explosives, and they practiced these skills in simulated missions. However, the psychological training was probably the hardest, and they were taught how to alter their appearance to assume different identities, and they were even exposed to torture, seeing if they were ready to handle the emotional stress that would come with getting caught. The training was grueling, and not all who started the program made it through. The standards were high, and the risks were well understood. A poorly trained spy was not just a liability to herself, but to the entire mission and potentially the entire war. Those who successfully completed the training were deployed on assignments that would test the limits of their skills, courage, and endurance. Once their training was finished, the roles of female spies were incredibly diverse, ranging from courier jobs and wireless operators to saboteurs and recruiters, all with the goal of gathering as much information as possible about the enemy's plans. Some were sent behind the enemy lines to form a bond with resistance movements and provide them with supplies, information, and coordination needed to undermine enemy operations. A lot of the time, their operations took place in occupied territories where their accent wouldn't be as obvious as in the hearts of the enemy cities. Those who worked as couriers transported critical messages and material across dangerous territories, often right under the nose of the enemy. Wireless operators like Noor Inayat Khan played a crucial role in maintaining lines of communication between resistance groups and allied forces. Stationed in occupied France, Khan transmitted vital information that helped coordinate sabotage activities and the delivery of supplies. Her work was so impactful that she was later awarded the George Cross, which is Britain's highest civilian decoration for bravery. Another remarkable spy was Virginia Hall, an American working for the British Special Operations Executive. She was deployed to occupied France, where she helped organize Maquis groups of the French resistance. Despite Hall having a prosthetic leg, she trekked across the Pyrenees, coordinated parachute drops, and even trained 3 battalions of resistance fighters. Her contributions to the war efforts of the Allies were so significant that the Gestapo even referred to her as the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Both of these women and all other spies carried out missions with danger and complexity that required an extraordinary level of courage. However, we are going to dive into the horrifying fates these 2 women and many more have met later on in this video. For now, it's just important to mention the contributions they have made to the war effort as they put everything on the line for the safety of their homelands. Unfortunately, not everyone was lucky enough to stay under the radar of the Nazis, and there have been a lot of spies have been caught on their missions. So what happened to these brave women when they were captured by Nazis? The answer to this is as horrifying as it is heartbreaking. Despite being extremely careful on their missions, they always operated under immense risk, especially those that led resistance groups, as a lot of people knew them. And while others not necessarily knew that they were spies, they were still known as an active part in the resistance. In some instances, spies were betrayed by informants or double agents within the resistance movements they were working in. The Nazis had their own network of spies and informants, and therefore they had their ways and methods to infiltrate those resistance groups. Sometimes these informants were motivated by ideology, but often they were driven by fear or the promise of rewards. In other cases, the capture was also the result of compromised operations, especially in sabotage actions. Despite their training and meticulous planning, missions could change due to unforeseen circumstances, such as unexpected checkpoints, changes in enemy patrol patterns, or even mechanical failures in equipment like radios or vehicles. In their job, a single mistake like a blown cover or a missed meeting could lead to capture. Technological advancements by the Nazis also played a role, as they have developed various methods for intercepting and decoding radio transmissions. Female wireless operators, who were crucial for maintaining lines of communication, were vulnerable to this kind of detection in particular. The Nazis would triangulate radio signals to pinpoint the location of these operators, which then lead to their capture. And the last reason they were captured was simply bad luck. Random searches, document checks, or something as simple as being randomly seen could lead to you getting captured. After they identified someone as a spy, the Nazis acted quickly and ruthlessly to catch you. The captures were often carried out by specialized units of the Gestapo or the SS, who were highly trained in counterespionage as well. They knew they had to act quickly, so after they pinpointed the location of a spy, a group of SS units would be sent out. Once they had been eye to eye with the spy, their goal was to capture them, so they could get vital information out of the spy. However, if there was any doubt that they could escape, they would be executed right away. After they were captured, spies were usually blindfolded and bound, with their personal belongings being confiscated as potential evidence. They were then transported to Gestapo headquarters or other detention facilities, where the process of interrogation would begin almost immediately. At that time, the Gestapo was known for their brutal and sadistic methods, and these initial interrogations were just the beginning of a long and torturous act that only had one outcome for the spies. The first interrogations usually were conducted in dimly lit, cramped rooms and were led by Gestapo officers who had been trained in psychological manipulation and physical torture. The reason why they interrogated the spies right after capturing them was simple. They knew that you just went through an emotional roller coaster and had a long drive to their headquarters, which means it was more easy to manipulate them and get information out of the spy. Additional to that, their questioning was endless, often lasting for hours without a break. Initially, the interrogators would constantly switch between offering false promises of leniency if they cooperate and issuing threats of severe punishments. Their aim was to exploit any signs of emotional or physical weakness and to extract as much information as possible. After this initial capture and questioning, the women were usually deported to prisons or concentration camps specifically designed for political prisoners. Locations like Ravensbrück, a concentration camp exclusively for women, became infamous for the inhuman conditions and the brutal treatment of its inmates. Just like in other concentration camps, the captured spies were stripped of their identities and reduced to numbers, a dehumanizing tactic intended to break their spirit. Depending on the situation, the spies were left in the camps for multiple weeks, which in their eyes increased the chances of a successful interrogation the next time. The life in the camps was a daily struggle for survival itself, with its conditions being abhorrent. Overcrowded barracks, inadequate sanitation, and eating rations that barely covered what you needed. Forced labor was the norm, and prisoners were subjected to grueling work schedules that left them physically and emotionally drained. Spies were regularly transported back and forth between the concentration camps and the Gestapo headquarters. Each of these transports would be executed with military precision. The spies were shackled and blindfolded and moved under heavy guard. Each of these sessions was reportedly started with a question like, "How did you like it in our camps?" A method to getting the prisoner to crumble. If the spies still weren't ready to talk, they were brought into another room undergoing various forms of physical torture, such as electric shocks and beating. Others were forced to endure something called cold torture, where they were submerged in ice-cold water until they lost consciousness, only to get taken out and subjected to the same process again. But the abuse wasn't just physical, it was also psychological. The interrogators employed a range of mental torture techniques designed to break the will of these women. They were often kept in solitary confinement, deprived of sleep, and subjected to so-called false executions, where they were told that they were going to get executed, but in reality, the execution got stopped right before. I think it's needless to say, but the Nazis' treatment of captured female spies was a horrifying violation of human rights. However, even in the face of such unimaginable adversity, a lot of these spies said nothing. While there are no accurate numbers, many spies went to great lengths to protect their secrets and the integrity of their missions, even when subjected to extreme physical and psychological torture. However, it's also important to mention that the human capacity for enduring torture has its limits, and there were undoubtedly cases where individuals were forced to give up information. The consequences of doing so were severe, often leading to compromised missions and the capture or death of other agents. But now let's take a closer look at some individual stories of female spies that stand out for their extraordinary courage and sacrifices. We already briefly talked about Noor Inayat Khan earlier. She was a British Indian spy and a wireless operator for the British SOE. Her codename was Madeleine, and she was one of the first female spies to be sent out to France. While she was able to transmit critical information to London, she was unfortunately betrayed and captured by the Gestapo in October 1943. Because the Nazis didn't see her value initially, she was imprisoned in Paris, where she made 2 unsuccessful escape attempts. However, after they found out that she had some valuable information, the Gestapo classified her as highly dangerous, and she was subsequently transferred to Pforzheim prison in Germany. There, she was kept in chains and in solitary confinement. Despite enduring 10 months of repeated interrogations and severe maltreatment, Khan never revealed any information to her captors. In September 1944, Khan was transferred to Dachau concentration camp, where she was executed shortly after her arrival. Her final word, uttered as the German firing squad raised their weapons, was "Liberté." For her incredible bravery and sacrifice, she was posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration for bravery. Another woman we already talked about was Virginia Hall. Despite having a prosthetic leg, she was able to help the resistance in occupied France. During her work, the Gestapo referred to her as the most dangerous of Allied spies. Her operations were so effective that the Gestapo issued orders for her capture with wanted posters. After she realized the risks, Hall decided to escape France, and she trekked through the Pyrenees to Spain. When she arrived in Spain, she was arrested for not having proper documentation, but was eventually released and made her way back to England. And despite this experience, she returned to France in 1944, where she continued her work and significantly hindered German military efforts. After the war, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only one given to a civilian woman in World War II. Despite being heavily searched by the Nazis, she has never been captured. And the last woman I want to talk about is Odette Sampson, a French woman who later became a British agent. She was sent to Nazi-occupied France in 1942, where she was a courier for the French resistance. In 1943, she and her commanding officer Peter Churchill have been captured by the SS and brought to the Gestapo. Despite being brutally tortured during her imprisonment, she never revealed any information to her captors. Realizing this, the Nazis sentenced her to death, and she was sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp but managed to survive until the camp was liberated in 1945. Sampson's courage during her imprisonment was extraordinary. She managed to convince her captors that she was related to Winston Churchill, a deception that may have contributed to the relatively better treatment she received compared to other prisoners. After the war, she was awarded the George Cross, becoming the first woman to receive Britain's highest civilian decoration for bravery. She was also made a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur by the French government. In total, we can say that the role of intelligence in the Second World War can't be overstated, and the contributions of female spies were invaluable during that time. Operations like the D-Day, one of the most significant turning points of the war, were only possible because of accurate and timely intelligence. For instance, spies gathered information on German troop movements, fortifications, and supply routes in and around Normandy. This information was vital for the Allies to understand the position and the strength of the German forces they would encounter. Other agents also photographed and sketched the layout of the beaches, which helped war planners to prepare for the attack. In essence, the intelligence provided by female spies was a mosaic of details that, when pieced together, gave the Allies the best possible understanding of what they would face on D-Day. Their contributions were not just supplementary. They were integral to the planning and execution of one of the most significant military operations in history. Thank you for joining us today at Past Perspective as we uncovered the horrifying fate of female spies during the Second World War. If you want to learn about more history topics that haven't been taught in history class, make sure to subscribe to our channel And if you want to learn about the horrifying things Soviet soldiers did to German women after the Second World War, make sure to check this video out as well. With that being said, thanks for watching, and until next time.